Hello, enthusiasts of AI, linguistics, and cognitive science. This is Dr. Ray Mao. Today, I would like to introduce the concept of metaphorical cognition. In everyday speech, we routinely talk about entering fields or markets climbing. While physically impossible, these expressions reflect how seamlessly our brains map abstract concepts to physical world. This phenomenon forms the foundation of our book, Metaphorical Cognition, written alongside Prof. Eric Cambra. We argue that metaphors are structural makers of human thought rather than simple stylistic devices. By formalizing this idea into a computational model and validating it against empirical evidence and interdisciplinary applications, we demonstrate how computational metaphor processing can bring us closer to understanding human cognitive patterns. These phrases are interesting because they barely register as figurative. An idea has no handle. Grief has no weight. A field of research has no physical boundary we can cross. And a market does not literally rise. Yet, bodily actions provide a readily made structure for understanding each abstraction. Metaphor makes the intangible cognitively manageable. Once these patterns are examined systematically, everyday language becomes a record of the conceptual resources people use to understand themselves, their experiences, and their cognitive modes. The argument unfolds in layers. Metaphorical expressions are observable in language. Their target source concept mappings provide a structured representation of how one domain is understood through another. Computational processing makes those mappings extractable across very large corpora. Neural behavior and simulation-based studies then test whether the mappings remain informative beyond textual interpretation. The result is more than a theory of figurative language. It's a research program for studying conceptual organization through interpretable traces that can be compared across people, culture, AI agent, physical space, and time periods. Cognitive science has a basic measurement problem. Cognition matters, but it does not directly observable. Researchers infer it from neural activity, behavior, language, memory, movement, and physiological signals. Each trace is informative and incomplete. Brain signals are biologically grounded, but difficult to interpret conceptually. Behavior shows what people do, but not necessarily how they frame the situation. Language carries meaning, but can also be conventionally or strategic. The challenge is therefore to find cognitive representations capable of connecting these levels without pretending that any one of them is the mind itself. A metaphorical word is a local event, but its concept mapping is reusable relation. The expression "the market is climbing" describes market change through upward motion. At the conceptual level, we can separate the target from the source and compare that relation across speakers, time, and context. This intermediate level is crucial. Words are often too local, topics too broad, and embeddings too opaque. Concept mappings preserve direction. What is being conceptualized, and through which concrete or familiar lens it is being understood. The book is designed as a connected contribution rather than a collection of studies. It first bridges intellectual traditions in AI and cognitive science that are usually separated nowadays. It then introduces MetaPro to identify, interpret, and conceptualize metaphor at scale. A three-part empirical program investigates whether concept mappings are biologically plausible, behaviorally relevant, and operationally useful. Applications demonstrate breadth across finance, health, politics, culture, philosophy, language, and AI. Finally, concept projection broadens the theory, answering how structured conceptual relations guide embodied and personalized perception, belief, and action beyond metaphor alone. Metaphor research extends far beyond any single theory. Philosophers describe metaphor as semantic innovation that enables a new way of seeing. Psycholinguistic accounts emphasize comparison, categorization, and conventionalization. Conceptual integration explains how blended spaces generate inferences unavailable in either input alone. Embodied approaches connect meaning to perception and action, while discourse research shows how local context and social environment shape interpretation. The book treats these traditions as complementary constraints. Metaphorical meaning is structured, dynamic, embodied, contextual, and socially situated. Conceptual metaphor theory distinguishes three elements. The target is the concept being framed, often abstract or difficult to observe directly. The source supplies rationale, bodily, or imaginary structure. The mapping records the relation in target is source form, even though the projected structure runs from source to target. This distinction matters computationally. A system must infer not only that an expression is metaphorical, but also what the speaker means in context and which more basic sense provides the organizing structure. Time is money is a well-known concept mapping. Economic actions provide a vocabulary for temporal decisions. We spend, save, waste, and budget time. The mapping is not a loose resemblance between two words. It imports a structured set of relations including scarcity, value, allocation, and loss. This makes temporal experience easier to reason about, but it also forms one model of time. It encourages efficiency and optimization, where alternatives such as time as rhythm, growth, or season would organize attention and interpretation differently. Argument is war does more than decorate debate. It makes conflicts, defense, attack, and victory cognitively available. Participants become opponents, positions become territory, and success becomes defeating the other side. The book contrasts this with argument is dance if there is another society believes so, where disagreement would be framed through coordination, representativeness, and mutual adjustment. The thought experiment reveals a core point. Source domains shape expectations about roles, goals, and legitimate actions. Different mappings can make different social worlds appear natural. A metaphor is used precisely because it is selective. It foregrounds relations that matter for the current interpretation, but no source domain can represent every property of a target. War makes strategic conflict salient, while hiding collaboration and mutual learning. A journey emphasizes sequence, progress, and obstacles, but may hide repetition or structural constraint. This selectivity is why metaphor matters cognitively. Analysis should ask not only which concept mapping is present, but which entailments it activates, what it suppresses, and for whom the frame is enabling or constraining. The book uses metaphorical cognition carefully. It does not assume that every historically figurative word triggers a complete cross-domain comparison every time it appears. A mapping may be active, conventionalized, strategic, or only weakly recruited. Context matters. Genre, audience, topic, emotional state, culture, and communicative purpose all influence selection and interpretation. For cognitive analysis, repeated patterns across comparable contexts are therefore more informative than isolated expressions. Metaphor is treated as a probabilistic trace of conceptual organization, not a deterministic code of the mind. Embodied experience supplies recurring structures such as contamination, balance, force, and spatial orientation. These schemas help explain why abstract ideas are so often understood through motion, location, pressure, or physical control. But embodiment is a constraint, not a complete explanation. Communities elaborate shared schemas through different cultural models, histories, values, and linguistic conventions. Variation also occurs within culture across region, gender, social group, discourse genre, and individual experience. Metaphorical diversity is therefore not noise, it's evidence of how common bodily resources are selected and reorganized in situated cognition. The book situates metaphor within cognitive science, an interdisciplinary field that examines the mind from several perspectives. Philosophy addresses fundamental questions about knowledge, reasoning, consciousness, agency, and the relationship between mind and the world. Psychology investigates mental processes such as comparison, categorization, simulation, and framing. Neuroscience studies the biological mechanisms of cognition, including semantic integration and coordination across neural networks. Linguistics examine the structure and the use of language, distinguishing among form, meaning, pragmatics, and usage. Cultural research explores how cognition is shaped by local histories, social practices, and systems of value. These disciplines differ in their objects of study, levels of analysis, and research methods. Under the umbrella of cognitive science, however, their findings can be integrated into a more comprehensive account of how people represent, interpret, and respond to the world. Metaphor provides a particularly revealing point of convergence because it connects mental process, neural mechanisms, linguistic expressions, and cultural experience. Studying metaphor therefore requires these complementary perspectives and also creates an opportunity to connect them computationally. This interdisciplinary foundation clarifies the relationship between cognitive science and artificial intelligence. Cognitive science develops theories of perception, memory, attention, learning, emotion, language, behavior, and culture. AI provides tools for formalizing the theories, testing their predictions, and applying them at scale. Yet, this exchange remains uneven. Many AI systems produce the outward signs of cognitive performance without modeling the embodied, intentional, and culturally situated structure that make human cognition meaningful. Conversely, cognitive science sometimes treats AI as a convenient analytical tool without integrating it deeply into cognitive theory. Metaphorical cognition helps bridge this divide. It is theoretically grounded, computationally tractable, and sufficiently interpretable to support inquiry in both directions. Cognitive science can use AI to analyze metaphor at scale, while AI can use metaphorical structures to model human meaning more faithfully. The book's structure follows a guiding image. AI and cognitive science form the soul, drawing together philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, and culture. MetaPro is the trunk that turns the theoretical insights into an operational pipeline. Neuroevidence, behavior, and cognitive simulation form the branches that expose the framework to empirical testing. The applications are leaves, diverse and responsive to their environments. Above them, concept projection is the starry sky, a broader horizon in which metaphor is one visible constellation within a general architecture of meaning. The methodological challenge is to preserve the cognitive richness of metaphor while making analysis systematic and reproducible. Minute close reading remains valuable, but it cannot easily compare millions of expressions across long periods or large populations. MetaPro addresses this gap by separating the problem into three linked tasks: It first locates metaphorical language, then recovers the intended literal meaning, and finally abstracts the target-source relation. Together, these three stages transform observable linguistic expressions into structured cognitive representations that can be compared across texts, populations, and contexts. The significance of this advancement becomes clear when we consider the limits of metaphor identification alone. A system that marks grasp, attack, or spiral as metaphorical has located figurative language, but it has not explained what the expression means. Without interpretation, the target concept remains unclear. Without conceptualization, the relation that makes the metaphor cognitively informative remains hidden. This is why MetaPro is designed as a pipeline rather than a detector. Identification answers where figurative meaning appears. Interpretation answers what is meant in context. Concept mapping generation answers why the metaphor works by recovering the relation between intended meaning and the expression's more basic sense. MetaPro connects two levels of understanding. At the linguistic level, it detects the expression and resolves its contextual meaning. At the conceptual level, it abstracts the relation that organizes that meaning. The pipeline is deliberately modular. Researchers can evaluate identification, interpretation, and concept mapping generation separately, locate where an error encountered, and decide which output is suitable for a downstream task. That design also supports cognitive analysis. Mappings can be aggregated by speaker, group, domain, or time period, while retaining a trace back to the original language. MetaPro formulates identification at the token level. In the economy is spiraling out of control. The word spiraling carries the metaphorical contrast, while the rest of sentence provides the context need to understand it. Token-level localization preserves grammatical structure and supports alignment with a later paraphrase. It also improves interpretability because the system identifies exactly where the literal expectation is violated. Some discourse-level metaphors remain difficult, but token-level detection provides a flexible entry point for both local expressions and broader contextual interpretation. Sentence-level classification can tell us that figurative language is present, but it does not identify the linguistic anchor. Token-level labels are more useful because they preserve syntactic frame and align the metaphorical item with a literal replacement. That alignment supports interpretation, translation, explanation, and concept mapping generation. It also makes errors easier to review. The trade-off is that some metaphors emerge only across sentences or from discourse context. MetaPro treats token localization as the operational function, while retaining the surrounding context for more difficult cases. Metaphor identification benefits from syntactic information, but naive multitask learning can transfer irrelevant or conflicting knowledge. MetaPro processes a gated bridging mechanism to control the flow from part-of-speech tagging into metaphor identification. The gate selectively exposes syntactic representations when they help identify contextual incongruity. This is a broader modeling lesson. Related tasks should not be merged indiscriminately. Structured auxiliary knowledge is most useful when the system can regulate its contribution rather than assuming that every shared feature improves the main task. Interpretation is framed as a paraphrasing problem for single-word metaphors. The goal is not to remove expressive force arbitrarily, but to recover the intended contextual meaning while preserving syntax and the pragmatic structure. She devoured his novel can be paraphrased as she enjoyed his novel. The literal counterpart provides semantic transparency for downstream systems and an anchor for concept mapping. It reveals what the metaphor is about, allowing the target concept to be derived more consistently from communicative intent rather than from a loosely selected neighboring word. Not every metaphor can be decomposed word by word. For a single word metaphor, MetaPro can search for a literal substitute that fits the sentence. For multi-word expressions such as over the moon, replacing individual tokens would destroy the idiomatic meaning. The system instead treats the paraphrase as a unit and pairs it with an appropriate lexical explanation. This distinction mirrors human interpretation. Meaningful units can be words, phrases, and constructions. A computational method should respect that granularity rather than forcing every expression into the same representation. Concept labeling is difficult because metaphor theory does not always specify a uniform abstraction rule. MetaPro adopts a consistent strategy. The target concept is abstracted from the interpreted literal counterpart, which anchors it in the speaker's intended meaning. The source concept is abstracted from the more basic sense of the metaphorical expression. This rule reduces ambiguity and avoids speculative selection of nearby context words. It also makes concept mapping more comparable across corpora because the same procedure is applied regardless of the expression or domain. This example shows why the three stages belong together. The original sentence contains the metaphorical verb devoured. Interpretation replaces it with enjoyed, revealing the intended target meaning. Conceptualization then connects pleura with the source domain of bodily process. Each layer answers a different question. Where is the metaphor? What does it mean? And which conceptual domains organize that concept meaning? Because the intermediate representations are explicit, researchers can inspect the system's reasoning, revise labels, and aggregate the final mapping without losing contact with the original expression. MetaPro 2.0 proposes a metaphor-oriented foundation model. Its key insight is that metaphor often appears anomalous under a literal rating. A verb selects an unexpected argument, or a familiar word conflicts with the surrounding context. Yet, the expression remains interpretable because a different conceptual relation is active. Anomalous language modeling learns from this contrast between contextual meaning and basic meaning. The accompanying dataset provides token-level metaphor paraphrases, supporting both fine-tuning and evaluation. The approach turns a classic linguistic cue, contextual anomaly, into a modern learning objective. The value of computation is not simply that it's faster than manual annotation. It changes what can be studied. Researchers can compare populations, regions, cultures, and historical periods at a scale unavailable to close reading alone. Explicit processing steps improve reproducibility and expose disagreements about identification or interpretation. Intermediate outputs preserve interpretability, while aggregated concept mappings support statistical comparison. Computation does not eliminate theoretical judgment or human review, but it makes those judgments more visible, repeatable, and open to empirical challenge. A rich interpretation can still be scientifically fragile if it rests only on selected examples. The book therefore moves from theoretical plausibility to empirical accountability. The question is not whether one study can prove that metaphor is cognition. It's whether concept mappings remain informative when connected to evidence with different strengths and limitations. Neuroanalysis tests biological plausibility. Behavioral analysis tests collective relevance. Cognitive simulation tests operational value. Their partial convergence matters precisely because the three forms of evidence are not interchangeable. The three empirical branches investigate different questions. Brain signals test whether metaphorical and literal processing and even different concept mappings corresponding to distinguishable neurodynamics. Behavioral evidence answers whether patterns in neural discourse align with the real collective decision. Individualized cognitive simulation studies whether concept mappings improve an AI system's ability to approximate how a specific person writes or decides. No branch provides complete access to cognition, but together they show whether the representation remains useful across biological, social, and computational levels of analysis. The neural study uses the Zuko 2.0 dataset, where participants read ordinary descriptive text rather than specially constructed metaphor stimuli. MetaPro identifies metaphors in those texts, and EEG segments aligned to first fixation are compared with part-of-speech matched literal words. The analysis found distinct neural responses, including stronger high-frequency variability and enhanced functional connectivity, especially in the left hemisphere. The naturalistic design matters because participants were not asked to judge metaphoricity. The signals therefore better approximate incidental metaphor processing during ordinary comprehension. The same dataset contains normal rating and task-specific rating, where participants search for relational information. Metaphor-literal differences appear in both conditions, but become more pronounced under the task-specific condition. This suggests that metaphorical meaning is not a fixed processing cost. Its neural salience changes with rated score and the demands placed on integration. That result supports the book's context-sensitive account. Concept mappings are structured cognitive resources, but their activation and measurable effects depend on attention, task, familiarity, and communicative context. The behavioral study investigates United Nations Security Council debates and compares country-level metaphorical cognition with voting behavior. Target concepts capture what countries discuss, while source concepts reveal how they frame those concerns. The relationship is not mechanically simple. Similar target cognition tends to align with voting consistency when countries also use comparable source domains. When source framings diverge, concentration about the same issue can coexist between countries with different decisions. Lead-like analysis further suggests a reciprocal relation. Discourse may shape later behavior, while past behavior also influences later framing. Role-play usually begins with a familiar label such as doctor, teacher, or public figure. The model then draws on a broad template. Individualized cognitive simulation begins instead with evidence extracted from a person's text, linguistic features, concept mappings, and profile information. In narrative continuation, combining concept mappings with linguistic features produces the strongest overall alignment. In interview question answering, the combination improves decision alignment, while linguistic features alone better capture conversational style. The results suggest that conceptual organization and expressive habit are complementary, not interchangeable. The empirical results strengthen metaphor-based cognitive analysis, but they do not authorize mind reading. A concept mapping is an indicator of framing, not direct evidence of fixed belief, personality, diagnosis, or intention. Brain signals show perceiving dynamics, but not fully conceptual system. Behavior shows action, not the entire frame behind it. Simulation shows operational usefulness, not psychological identity between humans and models. Metaphor-based cognitive analysis is therefore more reliable when concept mappings are treated as probabilistic indicators and triangulated with contextual and field evidence. The application chapter of this book is not a list of unrelated use cases. Every domain contains abstract realities that require framing. Risk, illness, trauma, identity, personality, value, threat, freedom, and action. MetaPro extracts concept mappings that make those domains manageable. Then statistical analysis compares distributions across condition, population, or time. The domain knowledge changes, but the analytical logic remains stable. This makes metaphor-based cognitive analysis both reusable and interpretable, while preserving the need for domain experts and context-sensitive conclusions. Financial headlines are dominated by action and motion-oriented metaphors because markets are abstract, distributed systems that must be narrated as if they move, struggle, rise, fall, or regain balance. The analysis of more than 1.4 million headlines finds that concept mapping distributions change with market regimes and vary across individual analysts. Importantly, metaphors do not simply mirror price direction. Up days can contain caution, while down days include recovery and resilience. Concept mappings reveal a dimension of expert cognition that sentiment and output volume alone do not capture. Human and ChatGPT answers share many conventional mappings, especially those built around action and process. But the model also shows distinctive preferences. When target concepts are controlled, humans more often ground abstraction in physical motion or sensorimotor experience, whereas ChatGPT more often uses generalized action, cognition, information, or sequence. The difference is especially visible in medical answers. This does not prove that the model possesses human cognition. It shows that its outputs contain structured representational traces that can be compared, monitored, and studied as AI-generated language increasingly enters future training data. In the mental health study, concept mappings are combined with social media content in a novel explainable framework named Hierarchical Attention Network. The improvement remains especially meaningful when explicit depression-related cues are removed, suggesting that concept mappings capture indirect patterns of emotional and experimental framing. Attention highlights language associated with bodily states, uncertainty, self-soothing, and distress. Yet, these outputs remain model-level indicators. They require clinical validation. The goal of this investigation is to uncover patterns in discourse and the cognitive framework behind language, not to diagnose individuals from isolated language. The trauma case compares Donald Trump's campaign speeches from 2016 with those delivered before and after the July 2024 assassination attempt. Although the dominant metaphorical inventory remains broadly stable, the post-incident discourse becomes more similar to that of 2016 and places greater emphasis on cognition, perception, construction, burden, and rooted political orientation. This pattern suggests that trauma did not replace speakers' established conceptual system, but reorganized it by reactivating earlier campaign frames. This reorganization may have served a stabilizing function, helping him restore cognitive continuity, reaffirm a familiar political identity, and sustain a coherent public performance under pressure. The method tracks shifts in public framing, but it does not diagnose the speaker. Across 6 U.S. epidemic peaks, COVID-19 does not retain one stable metaphorical identity. Earlier discourse frames it through uncertainty, disruption, threat, and isolation. Later periods emphasize resilience, misinformation, official guidance, normalcy, politicization, geopolitical relations, liberty, institutional cooperation, and adaptation. Keyword counts can show what is mentioned, but concept mappings show the role the event plays in public cognition. The same pandemic becomes an unknown enemy, an information crisis, a political problem, and eventually a challenge of social and institutional adaptation. Reddit discourse on diabetes self-management reveals a layered cognitive architecture. Patients make invisible physiology tangible through spatial and physical schemas, organize symptoms as events, interpret care through emotion and social relations, and sustain control through routines and tools. Demographics explain only part of the variation. Latent metaphorical phenotypes reveal different coping logics: fighters, navigators, and transactors. These patterns are not labeled for fixed personalities. They are interpretable tendencies that may help personalize the communication and support become more responsive to how patients make chronic illness cognitively manageable. Across floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, and wildfires, public discourse relies on a shared metaphorical grammar of action, motion, fight, size, importance, direction, and position. But distinctive concept mappings reveal different cognitive profiles. Floods emphasize fluid movement and coordination. Hurricanes emphasize force and spatial motion. Tornadoes activate rapid perception and communal aid. Wildfires emphasize attack, danger, continuing environmental transformation. These differences can support more targeted risk communication because they identify how each disaster becomes meaningful, not simply which disaster label appears. The study of U.S. presidential manifestos finds a long-term decline in metaphorical novelty, even after controlling for reuse and document length. Campaign rhetoric appears increasingly standardized. Yet, Democratic and Republican manifestos retain low metaphorical overlap. They may discuss similar national concerns while organizing them through different source domains. Incumbency also matters. Successful re-election campaigns tend to frame governance through action, achievement, and forward movement. Meta-analysis therefore exposes ideological structure beyond policy keywords, showing how parties make their preferred interpretation of political reality feel coherent. The marketing study examines peer-to-peer loan requests, where borrowers must make risk, need, and reliability legible to strangers. Funded and non-funded requests differ in their concept mapping distributions, especially after conventional mappings are removed. Lender-supported requests more often frame value, security, manageability, transformation, and situational clarity. Interest rate sensitivity also changes how borrowers describe themselves. Some use adaptive and opportunity-oriented frames, while others use concrete, transactional, cost-centered language. The results show how metaphor participates in persuasion by organizing a credible financial identity. 3 applications show why concept mapping level analysis matters. In toxic language, harmful discourse is not only negative, it repeatedly organizes identities through degradation, sexualization, dominance, and exclusion. In cultural analysis, liberty has a shared metaphorical backbone but different historical and geopolitical elaborations across countries. In linguistics, irony, sarcasm, and satire draw on common action and perception mappings while differing in reversal, mockery, and social critique. Labels may tell us what category a text belongs to, but concept mappings reveal the conceptual logic operating inside that category. The domain studies share a reusable analytical sequence. First, identify the abstract targets that organize attention. Second, examine the sources that make those targets concrete or actionable. Third, compare concept mapping distributions across people, group, periods, or systems. Fourth, test whether the differences related to behavior, outcomes, or a practical communication problem. This common logic makes the method transferable without making the domain interchangeable. Expertise remains essential for data selection, interpretation, validation, and ethical decisions about what conclusions should be drawn. Metaphor is a privileged example of a broader cognitive capacity. A concept such as apple can be projected as fruit, food, gift, temptation, or brand. Risk can become danger for one person or opportunity for another. These are not unconstrained associations. Concept projection refers to structured relations that become inferentially active. They shape interpretation, valuation, or action in context. Metaphor makes this projective architecture especially visible because one domain explicitly supplies structure for another, but the underlying capacity reaches further across cognition. Predictive coding explains cognition as hierarchical inference. Top-down expectations meet bottom-up error signals, and precision determines which source of information dominates. Concept projection supplies a representational account of many high-level priors. A projection such as uncertainty is danger can guide attention and action before all evidence is available. Beliefs become stable when certain projections are repeatedly selected and assigned high precision. Intervention can therefore work in three ways: introducing a different projection, reducing the rigidity of the old one, or changing the context in which each becomes active. The book's final ambition is not simply to prove that metaphor is important. It's to establish a scalable, interpretable, and responsible way to study how conceptual structure organizes experience. The roots are interdisciplinary theory. The trunk is computational metaphor processing. The branches are empirical accountability. The leaves are applications. The starry sky is a future science of concept projection across modalities, cultures, time, interventions, and intelligent systems. Metaphor makes abstraction inhabitable. Tracing its mapping may help us understand how humans and machines construct meanings from an uncertain world. In another opinion paper authored by Eric Cambra, Ray Mao, Nicola Bianchi, Amir Hossain, Keith Oatley, and Jeffrey Hinton, we argue that AI may bring about the fourth decentering revolution in human history. Copernicus displaced the Earth from the center of the universe. Darwin displaced humanity from a privileged position in the biological world. Freud challenged the sovereignty of conscious reason. Now, AI is challenging the belief that humans are the center of intelligence. This shift makes the study of human and machine cognition more urgent. If both can reason and create, we must examine not only their outputs, but also the conceptual frameworks behind them, because intelligence is not exhausted by what a mind produces. It also resides in the categories, relations, and horizons of meaning through which that mind renders our world intelligible. Metaphor offers a powerful lens by revealing how the abstract becomes understandable through the familiar. I invite you to explore the book Metaphorical Cognition. In an age when intelligence may no longer be exclusively human, understanding how meaning is constructed will be essential to understanding both the minds we possess and the minds we create.